everyone, welcome back to the Camino Cafe. I'm coming to you from Santiago, and I have a very special guest with me today. I just introduced Tara, but Tara, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming and being willing to do the Pilgrim Chat.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here, actually.
Oh, I'm so glad that you reached out to me and that we found a time that we could meet up, because we have quite a time difference between us. You are in Tasmania, right?
Yes, yes. And it's the middle of winter, so it's a little bit chilly here.
Okay. I've never been there. I've always wanted to go. So, wow.
Well, it's a place to come for sure. It's beautiful.
So tell me, how does a gal end up from Tasmania walking the Camino in Spain?
I actually didn't start in Tasmania. I ended up in Tasmania after walking the Camino. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My husband is American. I'm Australian. And I had been living in the US for about 20 years and was working in a corporate job and was living vicariously through other people's travel blogs and all that kind of stuff. And I had read about the Camino from a travel blog. And so I decided to, after I quit my job, I walked the Camino for the first time. And it was actually about 4 years after I quit the job. So we had moved back to Australia. We were living in Sydney. And then I had always wanted to travel full time. And after my daughter left high school and went off to university, my husband and I traveled full time for about a year. And then we separated. It was kind of pretty hectic living and working and traveling at the same time. So I started traveling full time on my own, and all of that travel was actually surrounding the Camino. So everything that I had scheduled was, I knew that I wanted to be on or in Sejon by the 15th of April. And so, did that, walked the Camino for the first time, did some more traveling, and then came back to Australia. And at the time, my husband was in Tasmania and we had been house sitting quite a bit. And so we just loved it. And so we just kept on gravitating back to Tassie. And now we call it home. Now it's our home base. So, we're not done with traveling yet. We are full time, but I would say that I'm clearly a Tasmanian at this point. I love it here. It's so beautiful.
I love the nickname, Tassie.
Tassie, yeah.
So
there are devils.
What part of the US were you living in?
I was living in Austin, Texas.
Austin, awesome.
Yeah. Great. So when I left, I was about 22, 23 at the time. And my first husband was American as well. And we moved to the US, moved to California actually for the first year, and got an opportunity to move to Austin. And the plan was for 5 years, but life happens and things change, and ended up being there for nearly 20 years. So it was, yeah, yeah, it was good. But it was good. It was a big, life experience for sure.
Yeah. So before you became a pilgrim and an author, what kind of profession, what did you do career-wise? What was like the main topic of
I worked for Apple.
For Apple? Awesome.
Yeah, I worked for Apple. So I worked in a number of different departments. But by the time that I was done, or by the time I left the last job that I was there, I worked for the Apple online store. And I was a process improvement analyst and procedure writer. So it was a very intense job because I was in Austin. My boss was in Cork, Ireland, and her boss was in California. So it was pretty much a 24/7, 70-hour week job. And it was really intense. So it was.
Wow. Is that what led you to need to walk a Camino at the end of that? Because you said that's kind of you ended that job and then.
Well, I was in that job, and like I said, I was living vicariously through other people's blogs, and I read this woman's blog. She had walked, and she actually became an author as well, eventually. But I just there was something about what she had written in her blog post, and I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. I would really like to do that someday. And of course, at the time, I think my daughter was about 13 or 14 at the time, and we had a custody arrangement with my ex-husband, and there wasn't any way that I was going to be able to leave and go and walk a Camino then. But I always had it in the back of my head that when she would go off to uni, that would be my time to go and walk the Camino. So there was a lag. It was about a 4-year lag. But in that time, from one woman's blog post, it was just consuming anything and everything that I could about the Camino to learn more about it and, make sure that it was the thing that I wanted to do. But it definitely called me. But yeah, so there was a time limit, a time frame between, but I wouldn't say it was necessarily the job that pushed me to do it. But I would say the job pushed me to go and have a life, because I wasn't really having a life while I was working in that environment.
I can imagine. So was the thing that pushed you becoming an empty nester, or was there something else pushing you that's like, man, I got to go do this Camino? I mean, it sounds like you were really prompted by this blog, and then that got you doing more research.
Yeah.
What was the big push that you were like, man, I need to do this?
Well, I've always, there are so many people out there that, when they're growing up, they want to be, a doctor or a lawyer or, whatever. They have something in mind that they want to do. People that, just have an intention. And my intention was always, I wanted to travel. That's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to travel. And so even growing up, my daughter knew when she went off to uni, I was going to be traveling full time. That was always just the plan. So, kind of set her up. But the first 6 months we kind of hung around just in case she had any issues. And we stayed in Australia for the first year. But I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to travel. And once I heard about the Camino, like I said, everything was kind of planned around that. So I did and when I left Australia, I went to New Zealand. I did a road trip through New Zealand. Then I flew to the US, met some friends in California. And then I drove from LA to Texas via, Las Vegas and Grand Canyon and Santa Fe, and saw some friends, then drove up to Chicago, met my husband. Like I said, we were separated at the time, but he flew from Tasmania to Iceland to see me, and we spent 5 days together there. And then he left and I went on to the Camino. So all of my travel plans were working towards Spain or France to go and walk the Camino. And then once I finished the Camino, I was just kind of like, what now? Because all of the planning was just for that that adventure. So yeah, it was
wow. So many things I want to tease out on this. So first thing is, do you recall the name of the woman that had this blog? You said she went on to become an author. I know it's been a while, so I hate to put you on.
No, I do remember her. Her name is Kim Danan. Okay. I might be mispronouncing that. She wrote a book called The Yellow Envelope, and it's a great book. It's a really great book. And her blog post, I don't even think she has the blog anymore, but it was called SoManyPlaces.com.
All right, I'll check it out, and if I can find it, I will put it in the show notes, everyone.
Yeah, and it was, it was interesting. I went back and I looked at her blog posts again after I had walked the Camino, actually after I'd walked the second one. And I thought, what was it about that, that really kind of, resonated for me? And it wasn't anything like really, I mean, it wasn't very descriptive. It wasn't, it was a very straightforward, very quick blog post that she had done along the way. And I thought it had to have been something that went, that kind of prompted me to look further. Like, what was that? What's that Camino thing that she's talking about? Let me look into that a little bit more. And I followed her, and I had been following her for a while because I was interested in travel blogging, and of course traveling. And so I just wanted to know, okay, what is this thing that she's doing? And it was from that I kind of started to dig in. But it was, kind of interesting that, that it's one thing that kind of ticked that for you. But like I said, it wasn't really anything that powerful. But her book, on the other hand, was a really good book. And it kind of talked about a little of her travels with her husband.
It sounds like she just really sparked your curiosity about the community.
Yeah.
So what did it feel like to you after having this big career? You're doing all this work at 70 hours a week and all this stuff, and then you plan out this trip and it's all kind of gearing up to get to the Camino, but you're traveling a lot by yourself for the first time, I'm imagining. What did that feel like for you?
Freedom. Freedom.
What did that mean to you? What did that mean to you at that time?
So at that point, I mean, like I said, I'd been working a lot, even after I had finished. So when I left the job and until I walked the Camino, 4 years, I was working as a travel blogger. I'd started that business myself, and as a photographer. And when we moved back to Australia, because we moved to Australia, I left Apple in 2011. We moved back to Australia in 2013.
Okay.
And so, and in 2012, I think, around that time, my husband also worked for Apple, and he left his job because his job was just as insane. And so between the two of us, I mean, we were together, working, living together 24/7. And then being in a car driving across the country, it was just really intense. And all I wanted was space. I just needed space and headspace more than anything else. And so it was
headspace more than anything else.
I think it was definitely headspace more than anything else. Because I mean, it was incredibly hard leaving him, because I was the one that instigated the separation. It was really hard leaving him. And, I knew that our story wasn't over, but I just knew that I couldn't be together anymore as a couple. And so, so I left, and it was really hard for the first couple of weeks. But then I started traveling, and it was just like, oh, okay, I can go and do and be. And if I want quiet, I've got quiet. And, it was a 4-week trip through New Zealand. And, it was just peaceful. It was just quiet and peaceful. And I think that's what I needed at the time. And then once I got to California, it was, partying with friends and, really noisy. And I just craved that quiet again. And so doing a road trip across the US, it was, again, lovely. But yeah, it was freedom, I think, more than, and just freedom to be able to just turn the noise off for a while. And it's, kind of like the Camino. I mean, just doing that, it allowed me to do that again. But by that stage in my journey, I'd already been traveling for probably 4 months on my own. And so by then it was a stage of, kind of figuring out, okay, what do I really want from my life, and, what's next? So that was more my first Camino. It was just figuring out what was next. Yeah.
And a lot of folks listening right now can probably really identify with you right now. You've been a mom, a wife, uh, had this career, and
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you reach a point when your daughter goes off to uni that you can now begin to explore the world. And then taking a break in relationship opened up more time and freedom to kind of,
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing from you is get to know yourself again.
Yeah.
To, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a really good friend in the UK, and she gave me a bangle for my birthday, a couple of years before we left, on our road trip. And it was that quote, she believed she could, so she did. And that one, I just kind of stuck with me. And it was the thing that really kind of made me go, you know what? I do have a choice. If I need to leave, I can do that. And, I can just make decisions of what's best for me. So yeah, that one kind of prompted me. And then there was another book that I read a little bit later, actually post Camino, that was from a book called Trudge. And it was about a woman it was a memoir of a woman walking the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT. And in her book, it was I believe it was her mum asking, and it was a kind of a ghostly mum asking, or actually, I'm getting that wrong. Her mum used to say this to her all the time, and that was, do you know who you are and what you're made of? Because I do. And that one really gets me, because that was what was, the thing that kind of brought my book, the first book that I wrote, together. Kind of like, okay, that's exactly what this story needs to be about. Finding who you are and what you're made of. And that was my first Camino, was figuring out who I was away from being a mum, being a wife, being somebody in corporate, understanding who I was. And that Camino for sure was what I was made of, understanding what I was made of. So, yeah.
This really intrigues me. So what did you find? What were you made of? Like you're walking this Camino, you're traveling on your own for a bit. And what were some of the things that you learned about yourself that you were able to take away from this?
One of my old bosses at Apple actually was following my journey, because I was posting about it on Facebook, of course, like everybody does. And I got to a point, it was post Cruise to Faro, and she sent me a message, and she said to me, when I look up the word perseverance in the dictionary, it has your name next to it. And I was just like, oh, wow, thank you. But by that stage, I had lost a couple of toenails. Which surprisingly is not painful.
It wasn't?
It wasn't painful. Oh yeah, I've seen horrific pictures of blisters. I've seen people with horrific blisters. Losing my toenails wasn't painful.
It just falls off?
They just fall off. Yeah, I know. Don't mean to talk about feet, sorry.
I always wonder.
Yeah, no, it wasn't painful. But then I got the Camino flu, and this was, of course, before COVID. Got the Camino flu, and that actually turned into pneumonia. So I got to Astorga. I wasn't feeling too great. And by the time I got to Rabanel, I was just like, oh, I feel like crap. It was just really not good. And there's a chair or a bench or something at the top of the hill of Rabanel as you leave town. Yeah. And I sat on that, and I just went, I quit. I can't keep going. It was so bad. And I had a pact like I said, with my husband, we were separated, but our story wasn't over. We were in touch. He had been to Iceland, so we were still talking, but we had a pact. And I said, if I say to you that I want to quit, you need to talk me out of it. I'm not allowed to quit. And he went, okay, sure. So I FaceTimed him from that bench outside of Ravenel, and I said, I just feel like crap. I can't keep going. I need to come home. I just need to be somewhere that I can just sleep and whatever. And he said to me, how would you feel if you didn't lay your stones at Cristofero? And I went, oh, crap. Okay. So I kept going, and it took me, I can't remember now how long it took me to get to Fonsabaden. And I went into the cafe there. I was there for at least an hour, just trying to keep it going, get it all together. And I ran into a couple of Kiwis, New Zealanders, and I kind of just latched on. And I said, do you mind if I walk with you? I just need to get to El Acebo. And then I have a reservation there. I'm just going to crash. And one of them actually had tendonitis. So they were like, yeah, we're walking really slow. You're welcome to come with us. And so I got to El Acebo, and I got a private room, and I just crashed. And I had been walking with one of my Camino family is a doctor, and I hadn't been walking with her, but I messaged her, and she said, okay, here's what you need to do. Go into a pharmacia, tell them that you have lost your inhaler, and that, you know, you're an asthmatic, that you've lost your inhaler. They will sell you one over the counter, and that will help clear the airways so that you can, you know, at least breathe and, you know, move on. So that's what I did. And if it wasn't for Amanda, I would not have kept going. But before that, and I'm just realizing that I've switched these, but when I got to Burgos, I was hanging out my coat. I was in a private room, hanging out my coat, and I threw my back out. I couldn't move. I just kind of pivoted and laid down on the bed, and I could not move for about 3 hours. And I laid there thinking, there is nobody here to help me. I need to figure this out for myself, and I need to get up and, you know, get moving. And so I crawled out to the reception and asked them for help. And they called around to 8 different places, you know, to massage therapists and whatever. And they found an osteopath, and they said it's about a 5-8 minute walk. It took me nearly 45 minutes to get there, and because I was just in so much pain. And the woman opened the door, and she said, you know, hello, how are you? And I just started crying. And she's like, come in. And, you know, it was the best massage I've ever had in my life. And I walked out of there, and she said, you need to forward your pack on. If you want to, you need to rest for 3 days and forward your pack on for at least a week if you have any hope of making it to Santiago. So between, you know, the toenails and the back and the, you know, pneumonia, it was pretty I wasn't sure if I was really going to make it to Santiago, but yeah.
So a couple of things on this. So what year was this Camino? This was your first one?
That was in 2018.
2018. And did you start Saint Jean? Okay. Yep. So for those that haven't walked yet that are listening, so that's the San Francis route. So you started in Saint Jean, and you have this back thrown out in Burgos, which is kind of early on in the Camino. Yep. So did it get better by the time you got to Astorga? Was your back in order? Or was your back
I was carrying my pack again. by then.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so now I want to go back to, because, I don't know if you know this about me, but I lived in Ravenel for several
Yes,
months.
I do know that.
Okay. So I
Yeah.
know that bench you're talking
Yeah.
about. So as you're telling this story, okay, first off, did you leave that morning from Astorga and walked all the way to that bench, or had you spent the night somewhere else between Astorga and Ravenel?
I had walked from Astoria to Ravenel the day before, and
Okay.
then I'd stayed overnight in Ravenel.
Okay. Okay. So you're waking up that morning, you've lost the toenails, you've got this Camino flu feeling.
Yeah. You
call your husband, who's promised to not talk you out of it. And so you had stones that you had brought from home with you at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was determined to lay those stones.
Yeah. Okay. So you're sitting in Ravenel, and that's a stage, walking from Ravenel all the way to Acebo. And so what did it feel like? First of all, like I could just put myself in your shoes right now of sitting there having this conversation with him and him telling you, no, you got to lay these stones down. And now you push yourself to Fonsabadan, and then you walk with some friends, you get to Cruz de Ferro. Take us there. That minute, that first time you see it, right? Because you don't see it kind of until you're almost there.
I saw that and I thought, wow, is that it? I mean, it's so it's so hyped up in your head of, laying these burdens down, and, you're imagining it to be up on a hill. But no, it's just the trail along, and, there's the parking lot, and, there's the field with the, little cabin thing. I got teary when I saw it, and I thought, okay. And I was with these other people, and I wanted to be respectful to them as well, because, they were there, and it's definitely a moment. I mean, it's a moment for most people. And so, I laid the stones down, and it was just, it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders, because part of it had to do with my marriage. Another part of it had to do with just some other anger issues that I was having. But yeah, it just felt like a weight was lifted off me at that point. And it kind of buoyed me up to, okay, I can walk, and keep going. But we're coming down into El Acebo, and of course there's wild lavender everywhere, and I'm highly allergic to lavender as well. So have pneumonia, which Amanda was the one who diagnosed me with pneumonia. And I just thought, all I want is a bed at this point. Just give me a bed. So yeah, it was quite the journey for me, but yeah, that was definitely a moment.
I find this story so interesting that you're having these troubles with your marriage, and here's your I don't want to, maybe the word's too formal, but estranged husband, but you're not done. And he's the one that says keep walking, and one of this, you got to lay these stones down, and one of the stones is about these troubles, right? It's a real story.
Yeah, it was. I mean, he had made that comment to me, and of course, two of my Camino family, I was texting with them too, and they were just like, you're okay if you quit. It's okay if you can't keep going, but you need to get somewhere where you can get some help. Right. So, but I know for sure that it was my husband's. How would you feel if it wasn't? I mean, came all this way, halfway around the world to lay these burdens. So I need to do that.
So you land in Acebo, and you get a little bit of help. And then your former boss says, if I look the word perseverance up, you're there.
Yeah.
It's you.
Yeah.
How did that feel at that moment when, you've had these troubles and you've been debating giving up, but you didn't? Did
It
you
was,
feel you deserved that title? Like, how did it land on you?
oh, at that point, I did feel like I deserved that title. But it was also something that kind of pushed me to keep going, because I thought, okay, if I've been through all this stuff already, I'm nearly there. So I just need to keep going. And I learned to one thing that I learned about myself too is that if I spent too much time at that point walking alone, I would kind of spiral down a little.
Yeah.
And I found conversation just helped with the walk and walking and the kilometers. And so the two people that were talking to me at the same time that my husband, they ended up meeting me in near Trabadello.
Yeah.
What's the town right before that?
Ponferrada? Oh, no.
Berzo.
Yes.
Yes. I
Villa.
can't remember the name of it.
I can't think of it either. Okay, I'll remember.
But we know
Right
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
right before Trabadello.
Yes.
I ended up meeting them there. So they were a little bit ahead of me. I ended up taking a taxi from El Acebo and meeting them there. Because I knew that, I had started walking with them. Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Berzo, yeah.
A second. So now, were they also walking? Or
They were
just...
also walking.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I met them on day 3. And we had, after Burgos, when I thrown my back out, they had kept walking. So I was behind them.
Got it.
But because I was in El Acebo and I knew coming on Ferrata, it was all wild lavender. So I had to skip that part.
Right.
But I just went a little bit further and I met up with them. And it was at that point that I just walked from there onwards into Santiago with them. And it was an amazing time. So
okay. So that was 2018. And then you walked a second time. Did you walk the same route?
I walked the same route and I walked it the following year.
The following year. And the whole princess.
Yep. Okay. In 2019.
All right.
With that estranged husband.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. So by the time that I was done with my Camino, I did some more traveling and then I went home to Australia and we reconciled and we're still together. But yeah, we walked it together in 2019.
Okay. So many questions here. Great. So you finish this first Camino and then you go home. You reconcile, or you reconcile during the Camino? You guys decide to walk together.
We were starting to reconcile back in Iceland. So before I had walked the Camino, we started the conversation and having those hard conversations as well. And so by the time I got back to Australia, we had kind of talked through a lot of the stuff already. And so, by the time that we were walking the Camino together, we were, completely back together by then.
I always think to myself, I think a Camino could either break a relationship or really make the relationship.
Yeah.
How was the experience for you? Since you're still together, I'm guessing it was a good experience.
Yeah. We do a lot of bushwalking and stuff, hiking together anyway. And we had been doing a lot of that, the whole time that we've been together, really. So my solo Camino and walking the Camino with him were two completely different experiences. Sorry?
I can only imagine.
Yeah. He is more the A to B walker. So got to get there. And he also is a bit of I'm a control freak, but he's more of a control freak when it comes to, he needs to know where he's going to be at the end of the day and that he's got a bed. He doesn't want to bed run. He doesn't want to fight for a bed. He wants to know exactly where So we did a lot of planning ahead, like 3 days ahead. So it was a lot different than my Camino of just winging it, for some. But one thing that we did learn, and he also walks a lot faster than I do. Okay. I am the epitome of a slow stroller. And I'm also, like I said, I used to be a photographer. So, look at that. And I'm out of breath. Oh, gotta take 10 just a minute. So he actually learned that it was better to slow down and really take your time and really kind of get it, enjoy the walk. So that's definitely a big change between it. But by the end, he went, okay, now I get it. Now it's better to kind of slow down and really take note of what's around you. So, yeah.
I think I could ask you a million questions about that walk, but I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about a couple of other things. But one last question about that second Camino. I'm just curious, when you got to that bench in Robinal, or you got to Cruz de Ferro, did you look back to that moment from the year before? Did you guys talk about that? Or were there things going through your mind that you're like, wow, a year ago?
I said, I almost quit. That's where I was sitting when you took me off the ledge. And, I think we took about it at the time. But when we walked to Cruz de Ferro together, it was snowing. It was just, it's actually now one of our favorite days on the Camino because all the wildflowers were out and it was snowing. It was freezing cold. But
what time of year was it?
It was the same time of year. So it was April, May time frame.
Snowing this time.
Yeah. And it was stunning. It was such a beautiful day. With our ponchos on and whatever, but yeah, it was a really significant day for both of us that day.
I can imagine. All right, so I want to pivot because we've only got a few minutes left, but I want to pivot, and I have to tell you, as a woman, as a human, I'm thinking you're the perfect person to be writing this book this book series that you've been writing. Because I feel like hearing your story now, I'm seeing a hero's journey, and I'm imagining you have been able to tell that. So tell us a little bit about your books, because you had a second one go to print. Tell us a little bit how these books happened and why and all the stuff.
Sure. So the first book is called Camino Wandering. It is not a memoir. I actually did write a memoir, and when I read it back, I was bored reading it, so figured nobody else would want to read it. Plus, I really enjoy writing fiction, and I've always enjoyed writing fiction. And so I decided that I would rewrite the book or take some of the bits and pieces from my own journey and kind of weave those into another book. So it's actually about a story from the point of view of a woman who has had a really hellish couple of years, and she's trying to, her son actually convinces her that walking a Camino may not be a bad thing, just to get her head out of the sand kind of thing. And then she meets two other women on the first day, and between the three of them, they form a really tight bond. And it's the three of them walking the Camino and talking, you get to meet all the other pilgrims that they meet along the way. So it is a fiction, but the feedback the reviews that I've been getting on the book have been, really amazing, which is lovely. But the people who do read it, who have walked a Camino before, have all said it's like walking with these characters. And some have even said, I want to walk with them. That would be a really great Camino to walk. So, that's been really lovely feedback. And then the second book that I have just released, it is a series that I'm writing, but the second book is actually set in Tasmania, and it is in the setting of one of the characters that was in Camino Wandering, but you also get to see, and I call them the lovelies, in that first book. They're also part of the story, but not the story. And then the third book that I'm actually writing now is set on the Camino. It's these three characters that were in the second book, and they're walking the Camino Francis as well, with recommendations from the lovelies in the first book. Oh, cool. So, it's interesting. It's like, I'm living these characters at the moment, but it's like every time I'm writing these books, especially Camino Wandering, and then this next one called Finding the Way, it's like reliving a Camino, and I feel like I'm walking it virtually. So the places are all real, of course, but the stories most of them are fictional, but it's stories that we've all heard on the Camino as well. So, yeah. So that's kind of how it came about.
Well, sounds extremely relatable. And
yes.
I'm wondering, did you know you hadn't written a book, you hadn't been published up until this point?
I hadn't been
traveled in writing. It sounds like you were doing some travel blogging. Did you know during this first Camino that I'm going to write a Camino book?
No.
So how did that?
Well, I had already written a book, and it's actually another book that I have published. It's a suspense fiction. Okay. I had already written that, and that was actually with an editor while I was writing, while I was walking the Camino. And when I finished the Camino, actually, when I finished the second one, I thought, it'd be really great to write a book to kind of talk about the differences of the two experiences and, whatever. But, they were so different that it just didn't meld. It just wasn't working out. And to me, actually, one of my Camino family said to me at one point that the Camino is not about the trail, it's about the people that you meet. And, going back to that saying, do you know who you are and what you're made of? That is the whole idea of all three of these books. And, once I had read that in Trudge, with, that line just kind of spoke to me. And I thought, okay, that's exactly what the Camino was for me. And I really think that could be what that is what it needs to be for this book. So, it goes back to that idea of that we all know and love. The Camino doesn't stop in Santiago. It comes with you when you get home. And it's constantly on my mind, even now. I actually started a Camino group in Tasmania because I need to find my people. Yeah. My husband calls us the Camino Tragics, which, he, like I said, for him, it was a lovely walk. He didn't quite get that same connection, which I was sad about, but, everybody's Camino is different. So it's, it was that Camino experience just continuing. And for me, it was writing a fiction book or three.
Wow, this has been great. I love this story. I think this, do you know who you are and what you're made of? I think that defines a lot of Caminos for especially women who have kind of experienced what you've experienced, becoming empty nesters, being a wife, having a career, and then all of a sudden we're in a big transition, and a Camino can really show you, can't it?
Yeah.
What, in fact, who you are and what you're made of. And then, of course, the journey keeps going. Absolutely. Wow, I think we could talk all day. I would love to talk with you. You are fascinating, and I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation. I want to encourage everyone to check out Tara and I will be playing 20 questions about the Camino. There'll be tips and just you'll learn more about her. So check that out on YouTube. And yeah, thank you for coming today. Please stay on and we'll start our 20 question recording. But everyone else, I can't imagine that this didn't inspire you to walk if you haven't walked yet. And if you have walked yet, I'm guessing you want to walk, especially that part from Astorga all the way up to Cruz de Ferro. What a great story that was. 2 stories in one.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Until next time. Buen camino.
Las cosas que necesito en la vida ya están aquí.